It is a great pleasure for me to welcome back our guest speaker, Dr. John Neustadt, ND, who is an internationally recognized expert on integrative and functional medicine, a researcher, and a #1 Amazon best-selling author on osteoporosis, and also one of the top 10 cited authors in the world for his work. He spent decades researching and underlying causes of disease and working with clinicians and patients to improve health outcomes through natural and integrative medicine. He has published more than 100 research reviews for book, lectured frequently at medical conferences, received more than a dozen of U.S. Food and Drug Administration orphan drug designations for the potential use of natural products to treat rare diseases. He hosts the Delivering Health podcast. He's also a member of the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation Corporate Advisory Roundtable and is vice president and treasurer of the California Naturopathic Doctors Association. This is his third talk with us. We're very excited to have you with us, Dr. Neustadt, and with no delays, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that gracious introduction. And I love that this is during lunch. This is a lunch hour talk. So your people have their lunches, they'll be eating. I hope that through this talk, as we go through, people will start to develop more of an awareness of the choices that they're making and the food that they're putting into their body. Because I like to say with every fork full of food or every bite of food, you're either feeding the disease or promoting your health. And there's no greater or better example of that than this topic of ultra processed foods. These are my disclosures. She mentioned Victoria in the introduction. Some of them, the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation. There are no potential conflicts of interest with this talk. I want to just start out by defining what ultra processed foods is so people can understand. It's not that food processing is the issue. And this is a statement that you see on the screen here by Dr. Montero. And he's the one who created the current classification system for food processing. It's that there's often confusing and misleading names put to food. I mean, what is the difference between a processed food and an ultra processed food? Most foods are in some way processed. Spices that you have in your cabinet, basil, dried basil or dried rosemary, jars of those are technically processed. Pickles that are jarred and in your refrigerator possibly, those are processed. But they're not all necessarily bad for you. And those foods that I just mentioned definitely are not, or those seasoning. And what you can start to do is understand, given this classification system, where foods you might have in your home or that you're eating at lunch or when you're in the supermarket, where they may fit on this spectrum. So on the far left there in this green area, that's minimally processed. So that's just the grinding, cleaning technique. So that would be the dried herbs that I mentioned. That are in your spice cabinet. Nuts and seeds, those are minimally processed foods. Meat, technically that's butchered and packaged, that's processed. It goes through a process. Then you have processed culinary ingredients, plant oils, olive oil, different vegetable oils, sugar, honey. Then you get even more processed along the spectrum here in the yellow, the processed foods category, where you get the canning and the pickling, and there are examples there down at the bottom. And then you get to this on the right side, the ultra processed foods category. I'm going to get a little laser pointer up here if I can. Here we go. There we go. This up here, the ultra processed category on the right. This is what's getting a lot more attention these days. And there are more medical talks that I'm seeing, more articles coming out about them, because the science is clear that when you get to this ultra processed categories, the health effects are devastating. And so what is it? These are basically industrial processed foods. And I say foods, I kind of want to put it in quotes, because they resemble nothing like what came out of the ground. They resemble nothing that our ancestors ate or even was available 30, 40 years ago. And they are broken down. These are food components that are broken down, or foods that are broken down into the individual components: protein, starch, fiber, processed, transformed in some way, and then put back together into a novel formulation. And then there are additional ingredients that are added in this process, such like emulsifiers, for example, or things that give a certain mouthfeel or keep the ice cream from getting crystals on it when it's in the freezer. Things like that. Those chemicals are added, and those are ultra processed foods. And 70% of the packaged foods in the supermarket are ultra processed foods. So if you have a packaged food in the US, it's probably ultra processed. And I'm going to teach you towards the end here how you can kind of look at the packages, think about what's in your kitchen, and see if it's ultra processed or not. And the US is the leading country for ultra processed food. There are 10,000 different chemicals in the US that are approved for consumption in food. About 60% of calories now in the United States diets are from ultra processed foods, compared to less than half in Europe. And depending on which supermarket you go into or where you shop, and this is sort of probably a demographic issue within the United States, that higher socioeconomic areas of the country, where they may be shopping at Whole Foods, which is more expensive than a Target or a Walmart, they have fewer markers of ultra processed foods than other stores like Target and Walmart. About 58%, again, about 60% of staples of the US leading supermarkets are ultra processed. And that's 41% more than in Europe. So if you're looking at a packaged food, it's probably ultra processed in the US. 71% of packaged foods themselves are ultra processed. And you can see the consumption over time has gone up. It didn't used to be part of the American diet as much. And even just since 2000, it's gone up now to 57% of all calories across the US. And I personally don't eat many ultra processed foods. I avoid them. I keep my exposure to a minimum. And so somebody's eating a lot more than I am. And where you see the increase in consumption and higher intakes of animal fats, plant oils, increased consumption of instant foods: cakes, cookies, pies, desserts, processed meats, sandwiches, frozen pizzas, all ultra processed foods. So what are some of the hallmarks of UPFs? How can what is it that makes them attractive to the industry, the food production and distribution industry, to put money into research and development and create these products and distribute them and sell them? Well, one is that they have a long shelf life. And I like to say, if it doesn't have an expiration date on it, it's probably going to be ultra processed. And even if it does, it's likely, if it's in a package, it's likely ultra processed, as I already mentioned. So these formulas are created not to enhance nutritional value, not to enhance and support the health of the consumer. They are made in a way, and these chemicals are used to make them better to go through and easier to go through and withstand the machinery in the food processing, because there's heating, there's molding, there's extrusion processes. And so chemicals have to be used in those so that they can, those foods that are being created. And again, I say foods, I'm not going to put it in quotes every time, but I'm not sure quite how to refer to it, but where these products are being created so that they can go through the machinery, so that they have a long shelf life. They can be transported easily and are not as sensitive to heat and won't spoil. And they tend to be high in salt and fat and lower in vitamins and minerals. They commonly have artificial substances like colors, sweeteners, flavors, preservatives, thickeners. The consistency of the mouth feel, they're engineered to have a certain feeling in the mouth. So for example, where in ice cream previously where there was, only a few ingredients. Now there are ingredients to reduce. If you reduce the fat content in ice cream, you change the mouthfeel. And so they're adding chemicals to that's not the dairy fat, artificial chemicals to reproduce that sensation of that creamy texture. So the intake, the impacts on nutritional intake are clear. They're energy dense, meaning high calories. They're nutritionally unbalanced. In a multi, kind of a global evaluation in different countries looking at the impacts, health impacts of ultra processed foods, there's an inverse dose response relationship. And you're going to see this throughout the talk repeatedly. It is a dose response relationship, meaning the more somebody eats ultra processed foods, the higher percentage of the calories that are ultra processed foods in their diet, or the more frequently that they eat ultra processed foods, the worse it is for their health outcomes. And you see in these studies in Brazil and Canada, Taiwan, and the US that the more somebody consumes these products, the lower their consumption of protein, fiber, vitamins, minerals, phytoestrogens, and the worse their dietary pattern. Consistently across these studies, what you see is that when ultra processed foods enter into the diet, they enter into the food stream and they begin to take hold in the consumer's buying patterns, that they replace healthier non-ultra processed foods. And there's a deterioration of nutritional quality in that society as well. So instead of, with ultra processed foods, that dose response relationship, you end up getting higher consumption of sugar. About greater than 10% of total calories is what's considered excessive consumption. I personally try to avoid or minimize when I'm buying products in supermarkets, or I go out to eat. If it has added sugar, I tend to avoid it. Now, I have my treats and, go out for ice cream with my family or have dessert sometime, but those are treats. They're not daily or even weekly occasions. In the US, 82% of people are in that upper quintile, meaning they're getting excessive sugar intake. And part of the problem is these ultra processed foods. You're getting more trans fats, which are increased risk for cardiovascular disease, and saturated fats, higher sodium, which is a risk for hypertension, and greater energy density, meaning per bite, there are more calories. So diabetes and obesity risks. And I'm going to go through some of these in more detail. Because what you see is that your diet alone is the largest contributor to non-communicable diseases. In fact, dietary risk accounts for 22% of all adult health globally, and 15% of disability adjusted life years. Meaning if people just had improved diets, well, we could minimize or significantly reduce the number of people who are dying and suffering because of it. According to the World Health Organization, non-communicable diseases account for 74% of all deaths, and 86% of those considered premature, and diet is one of the largest contributors to that. With that dose response relationship, we see is the higher the consumption of UPFs, that increases the risk, or is linked to the risk for ADHD, depression, cancer, frailty, all those here that are on this table: osteoporosis, IBS, functional dyspepsia, acid reflux. And in fact, when I see patients with acid reflux, there are 5 most common foods that can create that. And so just changing the diet alone can give great benefits for that. And then adding on to that are the ultra processed foods. The 5 most common foods that I find with acid reflux are chocolate, coffee or caffeine, dairy, not dairy, citrus, garlic, raw onions, and orange juice, or the dairy I mentioned. So getting those, peppermint also can be a problem, and spicy foods. So I digressed a little bit. So obesity, all-cause mortality, and metabolic syndrome. What you see here is if somebody's calories are greater than 29% of their diet is ultra processed foods, that's associated with an increased risk of obesity compared to people who consume less than 13%. And you're going to see this over and over. This threshold appears to be pretty consistent, that a caloric consumption of 10% or greater of ultra processed foods in somebody's diet seems to be that value at which you start to see, and the research is linking all of these diseases to increase in all-cause mortality if above 35.7%. And remember, we're talking 60% in the US. Ultra processed foods now account for about 60% of calories in the US diet. So this is a huge problem nationally, and it's cutting people's life expectancy down. Metabolic syndrome, significantly, ultra processed foods increases the risk of metabolic syndrome compared to people who consume less of it. 81% increased relative risk of metabolic syndrome compared to people who consume fewer ultra processed foods. The cutoff value seems to be 40% of calories, which is higher than, for example, for obesity, but that's where that cutoff value is. But what you see is a dose-response relationship here. For every 10% increase in ultra-processed food consumption, there's a 4% increase in metabolic syndrome. ADHD. Now, this is interesting because not all the studies are consistent, and where the negative studies seem to be appearing most in terms of linking or not linking ultra-processed foods or diet to ADHD symptoms is when it's more of a controlled environment and researchers are evaluating the children and looking for the symptoms that would be categorized as ADHD symptoms. The studies that are showing more consistently positive associations between diet and ADHD are ones where the parents, who are most in tune with their children's symptoms, are reporting behavioral changes after eating the food. There are some studies here, case-controlled studies from different countries, one in Turkey, one in China, one in Israel here on this slide. And what you see is consistently, compared to the control group, children with ADHD, they're eating significantly more processed meats, sugary foods, dairy products, and chocolate. There's a positive association with processed food sweets in ADHD. And those in the third tertile, meaning the upper part of the consumption of processed food sweets, had a 265% approximately increased risk of those who ate fewer processed food sweets. And what are those? Those are, packaged foods that are high in sugar. So the summary of findings in this study out of China was that, eating processed meats, fried foods, puffed foods, and that is a Chinese term. I'm not exactly sure what that means. Maybe somebody can clarify that in the comments or the chat. Sugared beverages and candies, all of those were positively associated with ADHD. In Israel, this was a self-reporting study, child diagnosis of children's diagnosis of ADHD from their parents. Their parents were reporting the diagnosis, and they're saying that every 5% of ultra-processed foods as grams of ultra-processed food over the total amount of food consumed was associated with increase of 110% risk of ADHD symptoms. Those are the citations if anybody wants to look closer. Frailty in the elderly, it's a huge problem. Decreased activities of daily living, being able to bathe themselves, mobility decreases, increases the risk for falls, fractures, lacerations, concussions, and being hospitalized. And what you see in this study is that the definition of frailty, you can see exhaustion, muscle weakness, low physical activity. This is how they were defining it with the participants. And the higher UPF consumers, those that had more than about 24% of calories as UPFs, it was associated with a higher risk of frailty compared to those who had less, meaning less than 10% in women. And so what you want to do is, again, emphasize where people can control their diets, eating more whole foods. And I think that this is a no-brainer in the sense that I think everybody's heard this before. but hopefully seeing that the incredible impact that ultra processed foods is having on people's health will help people, will raise consciousness on this issue, so people will decide to make healthier food choices. In institutional settings where many elderly might be, where control over their diet is more difficult, having conversations perhaps with the institution to start to move the needle and have some healthier foods if there is a high amount of ultra processed foods being delivered to those patients, and those people living there, might be helpful. What about GI disorders? These effects are systemic. It's not just as if ultra processed foods are affecting one system in the body. Every system is being affected. So IBS, higher UPF consumption is linked to irritable bowel syndrome, functional dyspepsia, I already talked about it, cardiovascular disease, higher ultra processed food consumption. In men, 22% versus lower 10%. And for women, about 22% versus 10.6% of weight. Now, one of the challenges that in the studies is that they're not, the protocols and what's being reported and tracked is not consistent across studies. So some studies are reporting percent of calories, some like these are presenting the amount of UPFs based on the mass or the amount of food, the weight of food that's being consumed. And so just navigating that and understanding that is important if you're going to get into the details of the research. But the bottom line, I'm going to keep repeating it, the fewer ultra processed foods, the better it is for your health. For heart disease risk, cardiovascular disease risk, every 10% increase in UPF consumption increase the risk. So what you see here for coronary heart disease and cerebrovascular disease, every 10% increase of consumption increase somebody's risk. Cancers, ultra processed foods increase the risk for overall cancers, just in general. No association, though, interestingly, for prostate cancer, but definitely for breast cancer risk. And this is where the frequency of consumption was looked at rather than the amount of consumption in terms of calories. So consuming ultra processed food less than 5 days per week, less than one a day, versus more than 5 days a week is linked to, is what is defined as regular consumption in this study. And that is linked to an increased odds risk or increased risk of breast cancer of 2.35 or 235% increased risk. Depression and anxiety. Quite a few studies done on this. It's quite clear, no ambiguity. The more somebody consumes UPFs, the greater their anxiety symptoms can be, the greater the risk for depression. And what you also see is just increasing by 10%, every 10% increase in ultra processed food calories per day. So, intake is linked to 11% higher depression risk. And it's a linear association. So it's very clear, the more you eat, the greater the risk. You're also seeing one study looked at internalizing symptoms. So higher ultra processed food consumption was linked to symptoms of boredom, crying, fear, worry, loneliness, unhappiness, poor sleep, and sadness. So dietary intake is really crucial I believe, for any specialty, definitely for general practice medicine, but for neurology, for cardiology, every specialty, I'm hoping one day will have detailed diet intake analysis done routinely, and will start to counsel their patients and help them transition into healthier eating patterns. Those are the citations. Cognitive decline. If people want to stay sharp as they age, want to have their wits about them, then decreasing ultra processed foods are important to do. What you see, again, the higher the caloric intake, the greater the risk. And this is just above. So some of them were much higher in terms of percent of daily calories, 40%, 30%. I reviewed those in earlier slides. For cognitive decline, what you see is anything above the first quartile. So that's from 0% of calories to 20%. So even it looks like lower than 10% might be associated with a 28% faster cognitive decline and a 25% faster decline in executive function compared to people who ate fewer than that. Osteoporosis, there's a study that looked at ultra-processed foods. This is interesting because this shows how different health behaviors can impact the overall picture. So with osteoporosis, what you see is ultra-processed foods, if they're consuming greater than 57.5% of their calories from ultra-processed foods, that's associated with about a 79% increased risk of osteoporosis. But if their ultra-processed food intake was high down here, but their physical activity was low, their risk was even higher, 422% or 4.225 increase odds ratio of osteoporosis. So that's where it's important to understand that getting these health behaviors and discussing these health behaviors with patients and helping them transition over time into healthier lifestyle behaviors is indispensable for health and for our healthcare system. Also with vitamin D, if ultra-processed food intake was high and serum vitamin D was low, that's also was linked to a higher risk of osteoporosis. Those are all epidemiological case control studies, those different studies that I just reviewed. There's been one clinical trial that was done to date, which was just a brilliant study. It was an inpatient study, or volunteers lived at the NIH Clinical Center, the Metabolic Clinical Research Unit, not far from GW. And this was just published in 2019 by Dr. Hall and his team. It was 28 days where they lived there, and they followed controlled diets. So the researchers they had a kitchen, and they made all the food, all the snacks were prepared every day, and they bought the ingredients at local stores. So easy, accessible, that anybody could buy. And the intervention was an ultra-processed food or unprocessed diet, eating freely for 2 weeks. So they didn't control the amount, the quantity of food they ate, just what they were provided to eat. And then they were immediately followed by an alternate diet for the final 2 weeks. So there was a crossover. It was 3 daily meals. They were given 60 minutes for each meal. And the meals, whether it was unprocessed or processed, they were matched for calories, energy density, macronutrients, but differed in the percentage of calories derived from ultra-processed foods versus unprocessed foods. And so here you can see the differences in the nutrient contents from the different meals that were provided in foods. So in ultra-processed meals, about 54% was added sugar compared to total sugar, whereas unprocessed meals, only 1% was added sugar compared to the total sugars. Insoluble fiber, so the ultra-processed meals had much lower amounts of insoluble to total fiber, and the unprocessed meals had higher insoluble to total fiber. Unprocessed, ultra-processed meals had higher saturated to total fat ratios, and unprocessed meals had lower. Omega-6 fatty acids, there are higher omega-6 compared to omega-3 fatty acids in ultra-processed meals, and the reverse in unprocessed meals. Omega-6 fatty acids tend to be pro-inflammatory if they're out of balance with omega-3. If you have too few omega-3 fatty acids, omega-6 fatty acids can promote inflammation, where omega-3s counteract that and are considered anti-inflammatory and help balance inflammation. So the weekly cost for 2,000 calories a day was $106 for ultra-processed foods and $151 for unprocessed foods. So 50% greater approximately in the price. They were shopping, as I said, at local supermarkets. And this gets back to that socioeconomic challenge that exists because these ultra processed foods are so inexpensive. And you also have food deserts where there are communities that have access almost exclusively or exclusively to ultra processed foods. They don't have the access, and many people are lacking the money and the time to be able to cook their meals. Convenience is another attractive thing about ultra processed food, instant foods, instead of having the time to prepare the meals and having the money to purchase healthier food. So that is a barrier that perhaps public policy can address, but there are also things that people can do that are inexpensive that can move them towards more of a plant forward, unprocessed diet. Beans and rice are not expensive. Meals plus snacks were equivalent to twice of each volunteer's estimated energy requirements to maintain weight. So what does that mean? It means they had more food available to them, more calories available to them than what they needed just to maintain their weight when they entered into the study. Now, this was an ad libitum study, so they could eat as much or as little as they want. So if they consume more calories freely, they would put on more weight. If they did not, they would not. In the ultra processed foods diet, the calories from ultra processed foods was 81.3%. Here are some samples of the meals that they were provided. So breakfast, day one, these are the ultra processed meals, things that you can buy at the market: Honey Nut Cheerios, whole milk, blueberry muffins, margarine. The second day was croissants, more margarine, turkey sausage, blueberry yogurt, Yoplait, lots of added sugar in Yoplait, Nutrisource with Nutrisource fiber, and then lunch, beef ravioli, Parmesan cheese. You can see these, but the common brands that everybody's probably, most of them, familiar with, and that are, some of them are even marketed as healthy. And then dinners, Tyson steak, gravy for McCormick, mashed potatoes, and you go on and on. For snacks, Lay's potato chips, Planters roasted peanuts, cheese and peanut butter crackers by Keebler, Pepperidge Farm goldfish crackers, Lucky Leaf applesauce. In the unprocessed meals, you see things that, again, are not from, not as many packaged foods, and different packaged foods. So instead of Yoplait, it's Greek yogurt, parfait with strawberries, bananas, whole walnuts, salt and olive oil, scrambled, this is a little typo, apple slices, this should say, and scrambled eggs made from fresh eggs, hash browns. Lunch, you can see down here, fresh squeezed lemon juice was used, spinach salad with chicken breast, dinner entrees. They did use Tyson's beef tenders, rice pilaf, and on and on. Daily snacks were whole fruits and vegetables, raisins, raw almonds, chopped walnuts. And here were the results. What happened? So just in that amount of time, the ultra processed food diet, people following them consumed about 460 more calories per day compared to people eating unprocessed meals. The results did not differ based on the diet order or the sex, meaning whether they started with the ultra processed diet and then switched to the unprocessed diet, or vice versa. Didn't matter if it was male or female. And so that was 460 extra calories a day from eating these ultra processed meals and snacks. Those on the ultra processed diet had greater carbohydrate intake. That accounted alone for 280 calories, and fat intake, but not protein. They were consuming lower protein. What we know is protein is so important to health. It's getting a lot of press as well these days. And the USRDA for protein as people age is insufficient to maintain muscle mass. And in fact, the amount of protein somebody consumes can account for 2 to 4% of their bone mineral density. And it's recommended as for healthy aging. You see studies that show that thigh circumference, meaning that the amount of muscle there, is linked to longevity, greater health span, greater longevity. And so where people are not consuming enough protein and probably these other micronutrients that are required for muscle anabolism and building muscle, this is increasing the risk for frailty. linking back to the earlier study that I talked about, and for sarcopenia and probably osteosarcopenia. They also consume, those on ultra-processed diets consume more sodium. And interestingly, they ate faster. So one of the things in these ultra-processed foods, because they have lower fiber, people can chew them and swallow them faster. So they eat faster. And when they eat faster, it doesn't give your body the time to send the signals to your brain that you're full. And so people end up eating more calories in the same amount of time. And here's just a graphical display of that, of some of the experiences they had. So the energy intake, you can see the ultra processed here in blue, unprocessed in red. Every meal, the only thing was higher in the ultra processed diet in terms of calories. The only thing that was not significantly higher was snacks. And then what you see too, they all felt the same sensation of fullness, satisfaction, and hunger. No significant differences there in terms of how they rated their experience of eating. So they weren't conscious that they were actually eating more and they were getting more calories. And so they felt their individual experiences in terms of what they were feeling while they were in this study didn't change when they were eating those foods, when they're eating ultra-processed foods compared to the diet, to the unprocessed meals. But objective measurements of caloric intake, of sodium intake, all were significantly greater, as well as others. And what you saw, also an objective measure, is the people who followed the unprocessed diet gained 0.9 kilograms during that. So that's just over 28 days. So, just under a month. So basically in a month of eating this way. Imagine that. People are eating this way month after month, year after year. Sorry, something came up here on my screen. I gotta switch that over. So weight gain did correlate with the intake of the energy differences, and the body fat mass also increased on the ultra-processed diet, whereas the fat mass decreased in the unprocessed diet. People following the unprocessed diet also lost weight. They lost 0.9 kilograms, the same amount that the people on the processed diet, ultra-processed diet, gained. What they did, which I thought was fascinating as well, is they took and they looked at laboratory markers to see what was going on with different hormones and different things. What you see here is in the GLP-1 was decreased in the ultra-processed food. So people are eating ultra-processed foods. They are gaining weight, becoming obese. Then some of them are likely going on GLP-1 agonists, the medication, then to lose that weight. But it's like pushing a boulder up a hill. As long as you are putting into your mouth and eating things that decrease GLP-1, you're just going to yo-yo back to where you were before once you're off the medication. As well, what you see is some of these other hormones were significantly different. Total cholesterol didn't change, but it did significantly change in the unprocessed diet. So cholesterol went down. The free fatty acids went up. Then you also have a trend. So TSH, there's not quite statistically significant, but TSH increased to 2.6 in the ultra-processed food diet, and there was no significant change in the unprocessed diet. So if this is the case where it's affecting thyroid hormone and TSH is going up, metabolism may be slowing down. You can get some other symptoms of low thyroid possibly developing. And what you see here in general is that you've got a situation where the metabolism and the endocrine systems are adjusting to the food intake. And in the ultra-processed food diet, it's adjusting in a certain way that's increasing the risk and is associated with the risk of long-term negative health outcomes. Whereas in the unprocessed diet, you can see it's adjusting to that dietary environment and decreasing the risks linked to adverse health outcomes. So why do people choose UPF? I talked about the shelf life, the convenience, the price, but heavily marketed. It's also heavily marketed. So for example, we talked already about the price of the ultra processed food diet and the study being 50% less than unprocessed meals. You also have social norms, especially among children. It's inescapable. I have kids, they're older now, but when they were younger, they would go to parties or at friends' house, or they see commercials. The pressure, the social pressure is can be overwhelming. And so if you're forbidding, children are totally forbidden from this, then there could be feelings of social isolation as well. It's convenient. They're sold everywhere. Gas stations, convenience stores, they're sold as snacks, drinks, ready to eat meals, ready to heat meals, and then brandings. The branding is really important, and this is where research into how it affects food choices provides some information about how we might be able to counteract this as well. And it's difficult with children to get them to eat differently and healthier. So what they did is a clinical trial with children 2 to 11 years old, and what they see is McDonald's packaging, food in McDonald's packaging was preferred to the identical food in plain packaging. The taste of the food presented with cartoon characters packaging was preferred over the exact same food, identical food in plain packaging. Would they like the food? So what's interesting with this taste one that I'll just want to mention is that it's obvious, and other research has confirmed this, that our experience of eating, the taste of the food, is not just the chemical reaction of the food hitting our taste buds or the smell of the food. It also is the visual cues that we're getting as well. So just the fact that having cartoon characters on the identical food that had compared to no cartoon characters on it, those with the cartoon characters on it, the children said actually tasted better, but objectively there was no difference in the food itself. When media characters appeared on cereal boxes compared to no characters, they would choose those. When cereal was called Healthy Bits, they would like it better versus Sugar Bits. Intake: children who receive meals with fast food logos ate 100 calories more per meal than unbranded meals. Again, the same meal, just the branding. Children were offered the choice of apples with a sticker of a known character on it, or a cookie without a sticker on it. And those who had the cookie, they ate with the sticker of the character on it, ate double the number of apples compared to the pre-test control. So just taking a sticker that makes it cooler or better could improve the choices that children are making. UPF addiction. So the ultra-processed foods meet the definition of addiction set by standards for tobacco. It causes highly controlled or compulsive use, psychoactive, for example, mood-altering effects, reinforces behavior that triggers strong urges or cravings. So, part of this, if you've ever had the experience like me, I'll be sitting, maybe bored or craving food, wanting something, and I will grab a package of potato chips and think I'll just eat a few and realize I've eaten half the bag before I even know it. And that's part of this picture, this unconscious eating that is cannot just be controlled by willpower alone, because there are physiological and chemically addictive aspects to these products. Most implicated in addictive-like behaviors. Most of the components of those products are the carbohydrates and the added fats. It disrupts our endocrine system. So there's this interface between our two reward system, one that guides eating for pleasure, the hedonic appetite, and the other that impacts eating just to gain nutrition and fuel, that's sensory or metabolic satiety. So what this is showing, and this is saying that, that pleasure of eating overwhelms those senses, those signals that you're actually full. And what helps to contribute to that is the food advertisements, the food smell, seeing others eating it, that peer pressure, the environmental impact, and negative mood. And behaviors are transferred from one person to another. They're communicable, And so what other people are doing are going to be influencing everybody that is associated with them. And so that environmental impact is important to understand as well. Food additives, rarely part of the story. I'm going to kind of move through some of this faster, but what you have is 10,000 food additives in the US, and this is a partial list of categories: stabilizers, food enhancers, colors, emulsifiers, foaming agents, synthetic sweeteners. 25%, 41% of adults are consuming synthetic sweeteners. 80% of children once a day, 56% adults once per day. Non-caloric artificial sweeteners. There are multiple mechanisms. They induce glucose intolerance. They're associated with diabetes and obesity risk. Polysorbate 80 is an emulsifier. It's allowed in ice creams, sherbet, non-standard frozen desserts. You can see by the FDA here, it contributes to that mouthfeel, that texture that I mentioned about. It's also an anti-foaming agent to make sure confections are set correctly. It disperses water so flour doesn't clump, giving lump-free batter or dough. And what studies have been done, and they looked at some of these emulsifiers like polysorbate 80 and carboxymethylcellulose or CMC, and they both induce low-grade inflammation in metabolic syndrome and obesity in mice. They alter the gut microbiota and create gut dysbiosis, and they promote colitis in animal models of IBD. Emulsifiers in the microbiome. They looked at 17 different emulsifiers, xanthan gums, guar gums. You see those in ingredients lists. If the maltodextrin also there, all contributed to gut microbiome alterations. Carrageenan, stabilizer, emulsifier. You can see this on packages as well. It increases inflammation. Mono and diglyceride fatty acids. Those were associated with increased cardiovascular disease, increased cerebral vascular disease. Food coloring, those are associated and have been linked now to ADHD symptoms and negative behavior outcomes. And here are some examples, even if dietary supplements might have these too. Look, this iron product has polysorbate 80. Baskin-Robbins chocolate chip, look at all these gums. Guar gum, it has carrageenan, polysorbate 80, mono and diglycerides. Even Scope, polysorbate 80. Now, I have not seen any studies that looked at alterations or the effects of ultra-processed foods on the mouth microbiome, but if it's affecting the microbiome deeper down in the intestinal tract, I've got to assume that it's also affecting the oral microbiome negatively as well. So you got to look at these other ingredients areas, even Mission Organic, things that are marketed, these big, beautiful words, organic, fruit snack, dairy free, even these that are marketed as healthy or healthier, you can see here with the tortillas, guar gum, xanthan gum, carrageenan, never quite sure which way to pronounce it. Welch's fruit snacks, red 40, blue 1, these artificial colors. The soy delicious, dairy free, locust bean gum, guar gum. And then also just looking at the overall nutritional profile of these, you can see corn syrup, one sugar, another sugar, right here, top of the list. Ingredients are listed in the amounts with the highest amount first, going down to the lowest amount. So very high in sugar. Food packaging. One of the things that's often not in the story is also the food contact chemicals. And that is, these are packaged foods. They're wrapped in plastic. They could come on foam trays. They could have foam trays that have chemical coverings on them to make them heat resistant. And what you see is that these contact chemicals are leaching into the food. So in one study that was done, they looked at over 14,000 food contact chemicals, and 25% of those were found in humans, in human tissue. And those food contact chemicals are linked to cancer, mutagenicity, reproductive toxicity, endocrine disruption, bioaccumulation, and toxicity data are frequently incomplete or missing on a lot of these chemicals. So the biological effect of a lot of these chemicals is unknown. Recall there are over 10,000 chemicals that can be in the US food system. And most of those don't have rigorous or any perhaps studies or data on their health effects in humans. So these were some of the chemicals found in that list of chemicals from food contact chemicals: bisphenol A, phthalates, which alternatives to plasticizers as well, metals, lead, flame retardants, PFAS, polyfluoroalkyl substances, polyaryl hydrocarbons, volatile organic compounds, and more. So here are some possible strategies for talking to patients and managing yourself as well. So, motivational interviewing, helping patients, understand their motives, their motives behind eating, and helping them reframe the food and what food means to them. Many people are eating for emotional support. So helping them develop healthier strategies around that. Understanding how is their access to healthy eating. They may not have as great of access as other patients. So helping them navigate that. Helping them with meal and snack planning, planning in advance. Home life assessment. What is their emotional support, stressors? What are the triggers that are getting them to open that bag of chips and eat the entire bag? How are their finances? What can they afford in terms of eating a better, healthier diet? And one of the things, just looking at your kitchen, if it's not an ingredient that you commonly find in a kitchen, it's probably an ultra-processed food. So people can look and understand all of the technical details of ultra-processed foods, but it's not something that you cook with or commonly found in a kitchen. It's likely ultra-processed. Or if you read an ingredient on a label and you don't understand it, don't eat it. It can be that simple. So that's another strategy that can be used to just minimize or reduce the amount of ultra-processed foods that people are eating. I'm under no illusion that people are going to avoid ultra-processed foods 100%. But minimizing how much they're eating them is an important strategy for overall health. Another thing is, look, if it can't mold, if it has an indefinite shelf life, don't eat it. And if you want an extreme experiment, you can just prescribe somebody 80% ultra-processed foods in their diet for 1 month, and they're going to feel pretty horrible at the end of that month, and then transition them back. There's a book that I highly recommend called Ultra Processed People that got me started down this line of research. And that's what this author did, put himself on that diet, experimented with it while he was researching this. The results were fascinating. I recommend that book to anybody interested in this. And reduce friction. So one of the challenges with human behavior is that we primarily work on habits. Habits are there to increase the how taxing it is on our brains to make conscious decisions all the time. So habits are shortcuts, I should say, are shortcuts to navigating our complex world. And so the more easily we can make getting unprocessed foods, the more easily it becomes to grab an unprocessed food compared to an ultra-processed food, the more likely someone is going to be at being successful to transition into eating a healthier diet. So what are some of the frictions? Even if you can reduce that time it takes to grab an unprocessed food by a few seconds, that can help, that can make all the difference. So in somebody's cupboard or pantry, having the healthy nuts at eye level and any unhealthy snacks lower down on the floor where they actually have to bend down and reach to grab it. The healthy food should be at eye levels, both in your refrigerator and in the cupboard. That can be really helpful. Having fruit prominently in a bowl out in a counter, in a position and somewhere in the counter where you walk by commonly. It doesn't, not in a corner on the other side of the kitchen that somebody has to walk all the way to and make a conscious effort to get there. So those are just some simple strategies that might be helpful. Increasing healthy food choices in children, cooking classes could be healthy. Gardening program, getting them in touch with food and food production, exposing them to lots of different fruits and vegetables, and then presenting them in appealing packaging. Stickers, images of well-liked characters could be implemented by parents or schools. And then giving children the autonomy to choose, helping them understand how their choices impact their health might be helpful. And here's the summary that I mentioned. It's all there. The dose response relationship, the number of calories in ultra processed foods. And really it's about, at the upper left corner of this image here, minimizing these packaged foods, and maximizing these whole unprocessed snacks and meals. My contact information, anybody has any questions or like to reach me through my website at nbihealth.com. And if there's time for questions, I'd love to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Neustadt. It was extremely helpful. And I know we have a few questions in the chat and not a whole lot of time. So how do you determine the utility of UPF among meal replacement protein bars and shakes?
So I don't know what you mean by utility. So what I do is I look for protein bars and shakes, and I look for those gums. Those are common added fillers that are in there: guar gum, carrageenan, xanthan gum. A lot of them are artificially flavored. If any of those, or if they have added sugar in them, or non-caloric sweeteners like sucralose, aspartame, I avoid them altogether. Just won't buy them. There are healthier choices out there. And if it's a protein bar, look, that somebody's eating, once a week, that's probably not, a couple times a week, probably not a big deal. But if it's a protein bar a few times a week, and then it has to be looked at in the context of their entire dietary pattern, where else are they getting ultra processed foods in their diet? And it's all cumulative. So I like to help people make healthier choices, identify those ingredients on packages. So it doesn't matter whether it's a protein bar or a package of tortillas, whatever they're looking at, read the ingredients, not just the fancy and large print marketing language on the front. Turn it to the back, the small print. That's where the important information is.
Thank you so much. Do you have time for one more?
I have as much time as you would like.
What evidence exists about UPF consumption influencing female reproductive hormones and how it may differ across the menstrual cycle?
I haven't found any looking at that, although there is one study I did find, I believe it's an epidemiological study linking it to, I believe it's infertility. I'd have to go back and reproductive problems or challenges with conception. I don't know beyond that. I believe that as of last time I looked at it, that was the only study I could find.
Thank you so much. I know we are at time. I see a lot of people asking for a copy of slides. Is it possible to share this
I would
particular?
love to. Yes, I can
All
email
right.
that to you and easily.
Wonderful. Then we will make it available to everyone. And I want to thank you for being with us. And we hope that you will carry this information into your life and how you approach your nutrition. And we hope to see you again next month for our next talk.